We need to close Guantanamo. I will now recognize Senator Cruz, the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Obama tells us the war on terror is over, that al-Qaeda has been decimated, and that we can now take a holiday from the long, difficult task of combating radical Islamic terrorism. I don't believe the facts justify that rosy assessment. 5 years ago, the President campaigned on closing Guantanamo, and yet Guantanamo remains open as a detention facility for those deemed to be the most dangerous terrorists that have been apprehended. And to date, the administration's position seems to be to continue apologizing for the existence of Guantanamo, to continue apologizing for our detaining terrorists and standing up to defend ourselves, but to do nothing affirmatively to address the problem. In particular, if Guantanamo is closed, it raises the fundamental question of where these terrorists will be sent. Now, we can embrace a utopian fiction that they will be sent to their home nations and somehow lay down their arms and embrace a global view of peace. I don't think that utopian fiction has any basis in reality. We have seen, whether it was in Boston or Benghazi or Fort Hood, that radical terrorism remains a real and live threat. Now, I have significant concerns about the Obama administration's overbroad incursions into the civil rights of law-abiding Americans. But at the same time, I have concerns about their unwillingness or inability to connect the dots and to prevent violent acts of terrorism. And until we are presented with a good, viable strategy for what to do with terrorists who would work night and day to murder innocent Americans, I have a hard time seeing how it is responsible to shut down our detention facilities and send these individuals home where they almost surely would be released and almost surely would return to threaten and kill more Americans. That's a question I hope this panel sheds some light on, how we can responsibly proceed in protecting the national security of this country, protecting the men and women of this country who expect as the first responsibility of the federal government that we will keep the nation secure. And I look forward to the testimony today on that question.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
It seems to me this is an issue that inspires a great deal of passion, a great deal of emotion, and it also seems to me that our national security policy should not be derived simply from bumper sticker ideology, but rather from careful, hard decisions about how to protect the national security of the United States. There are two facts in particular that I think are hard facts that I heard very little discussion of from the panel today. The first is, as of January 2013, the Director of National Intelligence in the Obama administration has confirmed or suspects that 28% of former Guantanamo detainees re-engaged in terrorism. Now, that is a very inconvenient fact for any argument that would leave a substantial risk of these individuals that are currently in Guantanamo being released. The second fact is underscored by timing this week, which is on Monday of this week. About 500 prisoners including senior members of al-Qaeda, escaped from the Abu Ghraib prison, which is now controlled by the Iraqi security forces. I think that likewise underscores the inherent risk in relying on foreign facilities to detain known terrorists, particularly terrorists for whom there is a substantial risk of their re-engaging in terrorism if they find themselves at large. The first question I would like to ask is to General Eaton. General Eaton, I thank you for your many years of service and leadership. There are, as of November 2012, 166 detainees in Guantanamo. Is there any reason to believe that if those individuals were released, their recidivism rate would be any less than the Guantanamo detainees who've already been released, who have re-engaged in terrorism at a rate of 28%, according to the head of the DNI?
Senator Cruz, thank you for the question. I spent a career managing risk. Soldiers never get all the assets they need to buy risk down to zero. The question, I believe, could also be posed, is the existence of Guantanamo a higher risk than the release of the prisoners we have there now? We have a terrific system. Our intelligence architecture provided 28%. If we accept 28%, then we have that same intelligence architecture that will help us buy down the risk of placing those individuals back in the care of countries that will take care of them, which is a requirement that this body has imposed upon the Secretary of Defense, a certification process. So when we talk about releasing the 86 that are cleared for release under conditions that meet the expectations that the Secretary of Defense has to certify, then I think it's appropriate, and I think that the risk associated with that is indeed relatively low. It's not zero. But I live in a world, a military world, that accounts for risk, and you buy the risk down with every factor available to you, and America has a great deal to help buy down that risk.
General Eaton, if I understood your answer correctly, it was that if detainees are released, we can act to mitigate the risk of their re-engaging in terrorism. I would note that it seems to me you did not dispute the premise of my question, that these individuals, if released, we could expect to re-engage in terrorism at least the same rate. And in fact, I would suggest to you, surely it was not the case that the people we released initially were the most dangerous. Under any rational system, presumably the first people released were those we deemed to be the least dangerous. And so the rational inference would be those remaining would, if anything, return to terrorism at a higher rate, not a lower rate than 28%.
Senator, as Yogi said, predictions are really hard, especially if it's about the future. And we've got a population that is unknowable to 100% prediction rate. So again, we mitigate risk, we buy it down. It will not go to zero, but I can't put a figure on it.
Well, with respect, General, it will go to zero with respect to those detainees if they remain detained. I mean, we're talking about the risk of future acts of terrorism. And let me say more broadly to the panel, at the outset I noted what I thought was the most difficult question, which is it's easy to say close Guantanamo and get an applause from various audiences. The harder question then is, what do you do with these terrorists? And it seems to me they're one of two options. You either send them to U.S. detention facilities. Now, the chairman has generously volunteered Marion, Illinois, to host these terrorists. I don't know what the citizens of Illinois would think of that. I feel confident I know what the citizens of Texas would think about their coming to Texas. I would note we have had multiple instances of individuals in federal prisons engaging in terrorism, directing terrorist act from federal prisons, including the Blind Sheik. Lynn Stewart was convicted for aiding terrorism for individuals in federal prison, or the alternative is to send it to foreign locations, whether it is nations like Yemen with enormous instability or other allies. And given the escape we just saw in Abu Ghraib, it is hard to have any confidence that if these individuals are sent to a foreign facility that they will not in due course be released and in due course commit future acts of terrorism, taking the lives of innocent Americans. I want to close with a final question, which is Mr. Gaffney, it has been reported that under the Obama administration, approximately 395 people have been killed by drone strikes. Are you aware of any reasonable argument that it is somehow more protective of human rights, more protective of civil liberties, to fire a missile at someone from a drone and kill them than it would be to detain them and interrogate them, determine their guilt or innocence, and determine what intelligence might be derived from that individual?